In 1975, a 24-year-old engineer walked into a boardroom at the most powerful photography company in the world, carrying an invention that would change everything. What he held in his hands was the world's first digital camera. The executive's response was immediate. They told him to keep it secret, and he did for 26 years. This is not the story of how Kodak lost to the digital revolution. This is the story of how Kodak invented that revolution and chose to bury it. To understand what happened, you need to understand what Kodak was. In 1976, 1 year after that boardroom moment, Kodak controlled 90% of the US photographic film market and 85% of the camera market. This wasn't a dominant company. It was essentially a monopoly. Their business model was almost perfect. They sold cameras at accessible prices, barely any profit. The real money came from the film roll. Every photo you took, every time you developed pictures, Kodak collected. It was the same model as razors and blades. Sell the handle cheap, charge for the blades forever. By 1996, Kodak was worth $28 billion and employed 140,000 people. They were untouchable. But there's something most videos about Kodak never tell you. The executives who decided to bury the digital camera weren't blind. They weren't ignorant. They knew exactly what they were doing. And the man who showed them the future, the engineer who invented the digital camera, knew it too. In fact, there's a quote from him that says everything. But let's get there. The man behind all of this was Steve Sasson. He was 23 years old when he joined Kodak in 1973 as an electrical engineer, unusual for a company that almost exclusively hired chemical and mechanical engineers. He was assigned a minor project: explore whether new CCD sensors could have any practical application. 2 years later, in December 1975, Sasson finished his invention. It was a camera the size of a toaster. It weighed 8 pounds. It shot black and white photos at 0.01 megapixels. For reference, your phone today has at least 1,200 times more resolution. It took 23 seconds to capture each image, storing it on an audio cassette tape. To view the photo, you had to connect the cassette to a television set. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't practical, but it was real, and it was the first of its kind in the world. Sasson brought it before Kodak's executives. The reaction, as he later described it, was curiosity mixed with something else entirely: fear. The executives said no one would ever want to look at their pictures on a television set. That photographic prints had been around for over 100 years, and nobody was complaining. And technically, in 1975, they weren't wrong. The problem wasn't that they didn't understand the invention. The problem was that they understood it perfectly. Here's the part almost nobody mentions. Kodak didn't destroy the digital camera. They didn't ignore it. They patented it. In 1978, Kodak received the official patent for the world's first digital camera. And then they did something that seems almost unbelievable. They instructed Sasson not to speak about it publicly. Why keep it secret if they already held the patent? The answer comes down to numbers. And those numbers tell a very different story than the one most people assume. Kodak wasn't a stupid company. It was a company trapped by its own success. Think of it this way. Imagine you own a store that sells printers at cost, almost no profit. But the ink cartridges you make are the only compatible ones, and you sell them at a 70% margin. Now, someone on your team invents a printer that doesn't need cartridges. What do? In 1975, every roll of film Kodak sold generated enormous margins. Film was the cartridge, and the digital camera was the printer that didn't need them. The executives ran the numbers. If digital photography took off, the film market would collapse, and with it, 80% of their profits. So the decision wasn't to ignore the future, it was to buy time. Sasson and his team kept working on digital quietly inside Kodak for the next 18 years. In 1989, Sasson developed the first megapixel digital camera prototype. Kodak kept it internal. In 1991, they quietly launched a professional digital camera for photojournalists. No campaign, no intention to scale. And in 1995, 20 years after the original invention, Kodak finally released their first consumer digital camera. They were late, and they knew it. By then, Sony, Canon, and other brands had already spent years in the digital market. And there was something else Kodak hadn't anticipated. The speed at which consumers would abandon film would be far faster than anyone had projected. Now here's Sasson's quote that says it all. When asked about the internal reaction to his invention, he said, "The feeling was that this was a very scary look at what could be possible in the future. Scary. Not exciting. Not an opportunity. Scary." That fear shaped every decision Kodak made for the next 3 decades. In 2000, Kodak was still generating $13 billion in revenue. By 2005, their US digital camera market share was 24%. Not a bad position. They could survive. But digital cameras weren't the real problem. The real problem was that film, their primary revenue source for 100 years, was dying faster than any internal model had projected. By 2007, their digital camera market share had dropped to 15%. By 2010, to 7%. And digital cameras weren't even profitable. The margins didn't compare to film. They tried to survive by selling patents. In 2010 and 2011, they attempted to sell their portfolio of over 1,000 digital patents. They couldn't find buyers at the price they needed. On January 19, 2012, Eastman Kodak filed for bankruptcy. $5.1 billion in assets against $6.8 billion in liabilities. A company that in 1996 had been worth $28 billion. During the bankruptcy process, they sold their digital patents, including those covering the camera Sasson invented in 1975, for $525 million. The buyers were Apple and Google, the same companies that built their business on the future Kodak invented and chose not to pursue. The lesson of Kodak isn't that they ignored innovation. It's something harder to accept. Sometimes companies see the future with perfect clarity and still choose not to move toward it because the present is too profitable to risk. Kodak wasn't destroyed by its competitors. It was destroyed by its own business model, one so successful it became a trap. And here's the final irony. The man who invented the future of photography spent his entire career at Kodak. Steve Sasson retired from the company in 2009, 3 years before the bankruptcy. That same year, President Barack Obama awarded him the National Medal of Technology and Innovation. Kodak never held an event to celebrate it. Do you think Kodak could have survived if they had gone all in on digital from the beginning? Or was their business model always going to make that transition impossible? Let me know in the comments. I'd genuinely like to hear what you think.